In this module, we're going to take our first dedicated look at EIGRP v6. And in fact, we're going to pack in both sort of the legacy classic autonomous system mode EIGRP v6 along with the address family mode. And we've seen some of these modes already, or I should say we've seen the autonomous, the address family 64-bit mode. But now we'll take a look at the classic mode because this is something that you often see still being deployed. Now, something to remember with EIGRP v6 and classic AS mode, the adjacency is formed via the link local address. It's not over the global unicast address. It's over the link local address. Now, we need to enable IPv6 unicast routing. If you don't, you're going to receive an error message telling you that it needs to be enabled. And it needs to be enabled under a specific interface. In classic AS mode. In named mode, you do not go under the interface to enable EIGRP v6. You simply activate the address family for IPv6, and then all IPv6 address interfaces are going to have the process started there. Now, if no IPv4 is configured, we've got to hard code a router ID in, or else the EIGRP process won't start. We need to watch out for that shutdown EIGRP process default. Now, in earlier versions of Cisco iOS, going back to like 15.1 code, what you would find is when you ran the IPv6 router EIGRP and then your autonomous system number command, that it would default EIGRP into a shutdown mode. And so then you would have to go into the EIGRP global config process and say no shut. So be aware of that. And when we're talking about v6, there is no network command, right? Remember, we've got to enable v6 under the specific interface. So let's go to the command line right now and take a look at classic or autonomous system mode. And we're going to use routers 5 and 12 again. They're directly connected here over their gig02 link. If I go from user exec to privilege exec and say show IPv6 interface brief, we'll see that we've got a link local address configured here, FE80::12. So, how do we do classic mode for IPv6? Well, we get into global config and I say IPv6 router EIGRP, and then we're going to put our autonomous system number in. So we'll just say autonomous system number 1. Now, there's that error message we were talking about. We never enabled IPv6 routing, so we've got to come back and say IPv6 unicast-routing, and then the IPv6 router EIGRP1 command is going to function. If we do a question mark here, you can see that the options that we have are almost identical to classic mode EIGRP with IPv4, right? We've got the distance. We can set the EIGRP. Let's go ahead and do the EIGRP router ID. We'll set it to 0.0.0.12 because we're on router 12. You can see there's that shutdown command. And it says shut down this instance of EIGRP. Remember, when we look at named mode, what did we see under the individual interfaces? We could actually shut the EIGRP process completely off under address family interfaces, or the address family interface default for all of the interfaces. But with classic autonomous system mode EIGRP v6, we do it right here. So literally, if I was to say do show IPv6 protocols, we'll see the only protocol that we have running right now is EIGRP1. So if I was to issue the shutdown command under the global EIGRP1 configuration section, it shuts the process down. So at this point, the process is no longer running, and you can see here router mode has been shut down. In fact, if I go back a little further here, you can see there's nothing. It doesn't say router mode has been shut down. Once we shut it down, we see that. In fact, if I was to say do show run, and since there's not much config here, I'm going to scroll. I don't want to miss what takes place before it. Let's see. We've got, here's our address family configuration, right? And then we've got sort of this disjointed IPv6 configuration out over here. And you can see right here, it tells you that the process is shut down, meaning that it's not going to run. Now, remember, in earlier releases of iOS, this was the default, is that you would say IPv6 router EIGRP1, and it would immediately shut that entire process down so that it would not start up on any interface that had an IPv6 address. or would not run at all, right? So here's one of the, we'll say no shut. So here's one of the differences between classic mode and named mode, right? Remember, and even with classic mode V4 versus V6. So with V4, how did we start the EIGRP process on an interface? Right, we would issue the network command. Well, you'll notice what one command is missing here under the IPv6 router EIGRP section. Yeah, there is no network command anymore. So what we have to do, and again, it's not that big of a difference, is we go under interface, the interface we want it to run on, gigabit 02, and we say IPv6 EIGRP 1. Right? We just simply put in IPv6 EIGRP in the autonomous system number, and I hit enter. And what will happen is this will start running EIGRP for IPv6, the process, on the gig02 interface. So let's say continue without saving, and we should see some IPv, and again, I apologize, I'm looking at BFD, which I don't want. I want EIGRP. There we go. So we're filtering by EIGRP, and there we are. We're looking at this guy right here. So FE80::12. And you can see, here's that new multicast address, right? Or I shouldn't say new, but it's the IPv6 version of the 224.0.0.10, which is simply FFO2::A. A and hex being 10 in decimal. So if we double click, let's see what the hello packet looks like for EIGRP, right? We can see right here, version 2. We get the opcode is the same. Sequence and acknowledgement are both 0 because this is just a hello packet. We get our parameters, right, our K values, and here we see now the K6 value, the hold time, and then the EIGRP version. And you're probably looking at this thinking, wow, version 23. Remember, we're running this on 15.6.3 code. This is the latest and greatest 15 code out for the M&T train for iOS on the 2900 ISRG2 series. And so we get our information here about the software version. But again, in terms of the information being communicated, the information is almost identical. And that is how we enable it on the process. So now let's go ahead and bring up the adjacency. We'll hop onto router 5 here. And let's do the exact same thing. So we'll get into global config. The first thing we need to do is IPv6 unicast routing. And then we're going to go ahead and say IPv6 router EIGRP1. And then we're going to go ahead, let's set the EIGRP router ID to 0.0.0.5. And we didn't do anything else other than go under interface gig02 and then simply say IPv6 EIGRP1. And that is it. Right? Other than that, there aren't that many differences between EIGRPv4 and EIGRPv6, right? The significant differences is that we need to go under the interface to enable the EIGRP process. If there's no IPv4 configured, if it's a greenfield v6 environment, we need to put in the router ID, right? And the commands are very much almost identical with the exception of instead of saying show IP EIGRP neighbor or show IP EIGRP interfaces, show IP EIGRP topology, we say show IPv6 EIGRP neighbor or show IPv6 EIGRP topology, right? And we're not exchanging any information, so nothing there. Show IPv6 EIGRP interfaces. So again, it is very, very similar to the classic EIGRPv4. So now let's go ahead and up the ante here. Let's get rid of this configuration. No router IPv6 EIGRP1. So we're going to remove, or no IPv6, sorry about that. No IPv6 router EIGRP1. All kinds of typos here. Right, so we'll kill that process for V6. We'll come over and do the same thing for V12. We'll back out here. No IPv6. Router EIGRP1, and now we're going to get into address family mode or 64-bit mode, and we've seen this already where the adjacency again is going to be formed just like it is. So now let's take a look at the specifics of EIGRP for IPv6 when we're using named or 64-bit mode. Now remember, adjacency is still formed via the link local address. We still need IPv6 unicast routing on. One of the major differences here is that when we say address family IPv6 autonomous system 1, that named mode is actually going to enable EIGRP on every interface where we have an IPv6 address. It's still true that if we don't have IPv4 configured, we're going to have to hard code that router ID, and this is just going to be sort of a series of the verification commands that we could run. So let's get back onto the command line here, and let's go ahead and say router EIGRP CCIE address family IPv6 AS1, and we're going to leave it right there. We're not going to or actually, let's go ahead. We'll hard code the EIGRP router ID in here. We'll say 0.0.0.12. But now let's come over to router 5. And we're going to do the same thing. Router EIGRP CCIE, address family IPv6 AS1. And I'm not even going to type. Take a look at what just happened. Boom, the adjacency comes up. Because remember, with named mode, again, with named mode, the process is going to start up immediately on every interface where there's an IPv6 address. So if I was to say do show IPv6 EIGRP interfaces, we'll see that it's running on gig 02. And the same thing is true over here on router 12. Do show IPv6 EIGRP interfaces, and we see that it's running on gig 02 and that the adjacency is up. Right? And so the commands that we use for validation and verification are the same commands that we use for the classic EIGRP with IPv6. Now, the difference is that if I didn't want EIGRP to be running on an interface, what I could do is under named mode is I'd have to go into the AF interface and we'll say gig 02, and here's where I could say shut down, which means don't run the process on that interface, right? Instead of doing it from the global EIGRP config section, I can do it from an individual interface perspective. And the same is true if I wanted to passive the interface, right? I simply come under the AF interface, and that is where I do the passive command. If we back out, so for summarization with the classic EIGRP mode, we went under the interface to do it. With named mode, I would go under the AF, the address family interface, and say gig 02. And then this is where I would have my summary information. This is also where I could tweak the hello interval, the hold time, right? This is where we passive it. I can shut the interface down, my split horizon commands. This is where all of that is going to take place. All right. Well, that is going to wrap up EIGRP for IPv6. Again, we looked at both classic autonomous system mode as well as name mode, and we saw that it's not that much different from classic or named EIGRP with IPv4.